right. So our guest today is Daniel Miessler. And thank you for being here. It's one of those, I almost don't know how to introduce you because I've actually been a supporter on Patreon for you for quite a while, or Patreon. I don't know, my sense, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way. My sense is you're like a brother by another mother for me, because as I read your stuff, you have an eclectic mix of interests that you aren't shy about and that you bring together. And it ranges across a broad range of subjects, and you cover them without any holding back. Every Monday, I wait for your Unsupervised Learning newsletter with glee, because it's going to cover all the things that I'm interested in generally.
I appreciate that.
No, absolutely. And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't want to be like a fanboy, but it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm super interested in what you're genuinely interested in. And so it's very hard for me to intro you, but we're going to dive into it. And one of the reasons is because you have I'm going to infer this and you can now correct me, but you have a personal mission of following the threads deeply that you're interested in. And as they tie together or don't, you explore that and then you share it, and you don't stop like a level or two deep. You try to cogently summarize it for people. So one I read recently was you talked about, I'm just picking one, right? I won't pick the most recent one I think I messaged you about, but one a little while back, you talked about how there'd be an explosion of creativity due to generative language models, just picking one. Good, bad, a whole bunch of stuff. You had like 6 points, and I read through them and I said, this is interesting. But it was well thought through, and I had the sense that you'd been thinking about it for a while, and it had built on other things you had said. And when you find that you're wrong, you correct it. And when you find, and so I just want to put that out there. And I know this journey started a while ago, like over 20 years ago. So I think the first thing I'm going to ask you right out of the gate is, did I do any justice to that? And if so, how did that begin?
I mean, I think that's as good an attempt as any. I'm not particularly good at summarizing the arc either. I mean, it really started as I've always been curious about things. I've always loved learning things. And as soon as I got a website, I started explaining things to myself in my own words, just as a means of learning things. And that turned into basically a tutorial site. And I already had like a journal prior to that, starting in like 94. So I took all my journal stuff and brought it over. And then, I mean, soon after that becomes what's called a blog, right? So I basically started the site in 99. And at the time I was learning TCP/IP, and I was a firewall engineer. And I would just document the things that I was learning. And then a lot of people will be like, oh, this is my favorite thing for learning the thing. And it's like, well, I guess that makes sense because it's how I taught myself. Right. And I just launched into the whole website thing. And then I kind of went directly into security, and I started security basically the same time that I started writing.
Yeah. And so there isn't an arc to what you're doing is another thing, right? So you do come to some conclusions at times, but I don't get the sense that there's either a narrative that you've imposed on things. It does feel like we're sort of coming along on your own exploration journey in some ways.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to have that level of transparency in today's world of it, because you're sharing a lot of your raw thoughts. Like, it's not necessarily always a conclusion. It's, this is what I'm thinking about. This is why I'm thinking about it this way. And I want to put that out there and see if other people agree, disagree. You're creating conversation over anything else. And a lot of, across both technical industries, politics, the internet in general, there's so much more, I guess, conformity. I'm going to say the thing I think I should say. Yeah. More than I'm going to say something that might be right, it might be wrong. I want to start the conversation. I want to have an intellectual debate. And that lack of intellectual debate on a lot of fronts and forums, especially on the main social media, Twitter, Reddit, etc., I think is it's causing challenges both for us as an industry, but as a broader human society as well.
Absolutely.
I read your about this morning to refresh, and you referred to, I guess, the mini site and the works that spin off, I suppose, the blogs that you do and things is, I'm going to paraphrase because I'm not going to get it right, as the most important work that you do. Do you see it that way? Do you see it as like a body of work? Because I think you were sort of thinking about it as you're it's like an expression of thoughts over time is what I took away from it. That this is almost the growth of how you think about some subjects, and that itself has value.
Yeah, I will probably rewrite that soon. I feel like AI has changed my perspective on so many things. And I feel it's just time for a refresh for that page. But no, the thing I said that I think is like one of the most important things, or might be the most important project, is the idea of capturing oneself. The idea of having a digital avatar, like a second.
Yeah, you did use that phrase, which really struck me.
Yeah. So one aspect is like it's a second brain. So I can't remember half the things that I've learned and forgotten, right?
Right.
But if I go in a review in a structure that makes sense, I could be like, oh, that's how those connect together. That's how those things relate to each other. Because I'm all about the interactions between these things, right? That's the thing that's most exciting to me is like, I think it was like a particle accelerator. And I also don't take much credit for any of the ideas that I have, because that's not how I see ideas. I see it more like a particle accelerator where you have like this, my brain is the thing that's stationary, and we are shooting ideas at my brain at high velocity. And it's some of them stick in there, and some, like, either way, it produces these massive explosions, right? Because what happens if I'm reading a thing about baking clay or something, some random thing, and this person is going off on it and just loving talking about it, I'm vibing on their enthusiasm, but I'm seeing this whole thing about crafting. So while they're talking about, oh, and I do this with my hand, and I have to make sure it's not warm or soft, I have 9 other ideas about how this relates to some random security methodology I'm messing with, or some random other thing. And I'm just like, oh, those are kind of similar. And then I just see this map, and then I go write a blog post about how these things are similar. And the easiest way to tell that I'm not responsible for any of these ideas is I stop having ideas when I stop reading.
Yeah.
If I stop reading amazing content, like I just like deaden.
I'm always reading, and so yesterday I was giving a presentation in Chicago at a meetup, and in the middle of the presentation, as I was trying to find an analogy for Zero Trust, I wound up talking about the Dark Forest and Enrico Fermi and Drake, and I was like, the internet's a dark forest. Now that's not my. I came up with none of the components for that, right? But they collided in that moment as I was reaching.
Yes,
and it's that. Ages ago, Dawkins wrote a book about where he came up with the term meme, and it's come to mean stupid stuff on the internet. But memetics, for all that it has poorly progressed, there's a soup of ideas that sort of combine and recombine, and there's sort of at least the genotype of it is constantly at high speed evolving in the human brain. It happens with bird song and birds, and you're a nexus for that. That's what's happening when you're reading and consuming and putting it back out. And so I totally relate to that. I mean, the notion of intellectual contamination is the antithesis of IP, right?
Yeah.
The net summary of something is greater than the original work sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And it relates a lot to, like Ed Sheeran just went through some IP thing for his music.
Yeah, I saw that.
I forgot what the song was, but very old song. But he's just like, yeah, this is not the way music works. Music is constant copying. Like, it's called a sample because it's a sample of something else.
The one thing I hate is when I can't remember the source on something. I'm about to do it. I read that there were songs that were played by musicians 100 years ago that are still floating around among the songs birds sing to each other that are being riffed on still now.
That's incredible.
I'm going to try and find the source for it. Maybe we'll put it in the links, but if that's true, how do we expect humans to like?
Yeah,
I don't want to excuse copyright theft, and I'm certainly not about to do that with what's going on with generative language models. But this is not an easy subject. In fact, so back to what you were saying earlier about like this copy of your brain. Prior to the current wave of technology, I read a lot of science fiction, among other things, and I was thinking, wow, one day somebody will be able to say, I want to speak to the avatar of me or somebody else out there. Mm-hmm. And my brother's also in cyber. So for fun, he asked one of the generative language models he used. He said, hey, write me a blog about insiders and blah, 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 in the voice of my brother. Yep. And he did a startlingly good job.
Yep.
And I was like, that's a heartbeat away. And you're more prolific in terms of what's out there. I wonder how far we are from having a Daniel Miessler available avatar for people to invoke. Right. And what is that? Right.
It's pretty easy. So I have one for myself. And I'm kind of writing essays. One or two of my recent ones were written by the AI that I wrote. So I wrote a generator. I can make a generator in almost like a Paul Graham sort of style, and then in my sort of style, which it just has different breaks and headings. Mine has a summary with bullets, and then the final sentence matches the top sentence. So I got a bunch of rules in there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you've told it what the sequence or the format is for you, as opposed to it inferring that.
Yeah, that's like 2 pages of prompt. And then I give it one of my favorite essays of my own, and I say kind of like this. And so now what I do is I just go in and if I want to use this technique, if I'm curious if it's going to work or not, what I do is I just write bullets. Mm. So this last essay that I wrote was quite long, and I ended up writing like 3 pages of bullets. And it was just one line after another. It doesn't even need to be actually bulleted as long as there's space in between. Actually, you don't even need the space. That's just for us. But I just riffed for like 20 minutes. Copy. I actually have it in a Spanso a shortcut. So I just do copy. I go down and I do semicolon DM. And about 10 seconds later, it'll pop out fully written in my voice.
And that's pretty cool.
The semicolon and then the DM is Daniel Miessler, right? But
yeah.
And does it meet your standard for quality and style?
Not really. Not quite.
You then have to do a little editing on it.
Actually, it does meet the standard. It doesn't feel quite as personal.
The language it picks feels more dry, or does it feel less emotional?
I don't know what it is. Something's getting a little bit taken away. So it's funny. I did this 2 or 3 times in the last month, and I had the intention of doing the trick and having it rewrite the essay. Mm-hmm. And as I was writing, I was like, "How is the bullets are better than the thing that it made?" So I just ended up just using the thing is, it turned out that I just wrote the essay.
Nice.
I thought I was saving myself time, but the bullets itself were the essay.
The act of summarizing it was tighter. In a way. Yeah. It's funny. I see this as an extension of you. I don't see this as not you, because I'm reminded years ago, I was talking to somebody about grief, and when you lose someone, you don't just lose someone. When you have a deep relationship with someone, you sort of outsource parts of your life to them.
Yes.
and you sort of, you like if you're married to someone, knowledge about what birthdays are or where a certain thing is or some functions. Mm-hmm. And so you then have, when you lose them, you also lose not just that, but every time that function comes up or that piece of knowledge, it hits you again. And that notion of outsourcing, I think we first started, we've done it many, many times, but the first time that I became aware of doing it with a non-animated thing was Google, right? Where I realized, hey, it's okay as long as I stay away from leaky abstraction. It's okay that I'm outsourcing some pointers to knowledge to things like external knowledge sources. But I feel like this is now an expansion of your capability. I think Scientific American years ago coined a term that didn't take off called Homo sapiens informaticus. I don't know if you ever heard that term. It was what is the human experience in a world that has these digital extensions of ourselves is at least how I remember it, to the point that it's not my idea. It was a bunch of other ideas. So I don't know what lawyers will one day say, but that strikes me as you finding ways to expand the thinking sphere of what DM is.
That's absolutely the way I think about it. So I've written like 25 APIs now. Some I'm going to like turn into products or whatever, but most of them are like utilities. And so I use it to proofread. I use it to write an essay. I use it to validate an incident. I use it to summarize articles. I use it for everything. So it just becomes like, I feel like AI is like making us superhumans. And the final form of this, of course, is when you have the question of like, what is the tallest tree? You will phrase that in a way that the listening electrodes in the brain can actually catch it, and it'll send it to an LLM, and it'll just return it, and it'll feel like no different than when you send a question into the void of your own brain.
Right.
Because when you ask the question, what's the tallest tree? You're actually just like shouting it over a wall.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't know what's on the other side of your brain. Your brain might be like, oh, it's Hyperion. It's in the redwood forest. Or it might be like, I don't know. Why don't you Google it? Like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
But the more seamless that becomes, though, I mentioned leaky abstraction, right? Which is for me the difference between being, well, leaky abstraction is every time you abstract something that you lose something in not understanding how something works below the hood. So once you understand it a little bit, then it's different. But you're talking about actually being a service to the brain. But there's a difference between being informed about something and understanding something. What you're talking about is literally information retrieval, which is different, right?
But that blurs if it's something like, I wonder what the pattern is between these things, right? Because now there's less retrieval and more concepts.
Right.
It's going to be very strange. I came up with a thing a long time ago, which I don't know if it'll ever come into fashion, but aug and nog, which I really liked because it's 2 syllables. So augmented, and nog is non-augmented. So it's like, so I took the pen testing course, OSCP level 97 or whatever, and I got a 94. It's like, okay, but was that nog? No, it was aug, but I still got the score.
Right.
So your
like
brain
open
is
book
so
or closed book. Yeah.
Yeah, your brain is so coupled with the greater information stored in whatever LLMs. In this case,
the only reason I think you'd want to know aug versus nog in this case is in the case of a denial of service for your augmentation, right? I mean,
right.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, maybe not the only, but that's one. Yeah.
Well, it's raw intelligence that you're physically equipped with versus intelligence that's brought to you by what we've created as a whole as in humanity, right?
Yeah, it's like if you're navigating the countryside and you've got this giant map on your dashboard and you're trying to read things, like that's a different world than just following the instructions on Google Maps.
Or in the case that you're mentioning, the instructions just come to you in your mind as you ask for them. Exactly. Do I take a left next or a right? And then it appears in your mind more than anything else.
Totally. And the step before that, like it'll just be in your glasses, your contact lens.
Right. I'd really want that technology to hit mainstream. I was just saying to a friend this morning, how antiquated is the keyboard? When you really think about sitting there and using your fingers to press all these little tiny buttons to interface with the machine, it's like, how much longer are we going to have that? And how soon till we don't?
In tool use, there's this notion of attenuating to the task versus attenuating to the tool. And the reason we like to use keyboards is because we have a high bandwidth in it and we don't think much when we use it. It's incredibly frustrating for those who first start to use it. But I think those things that let us more transparently engage with the task are much better. And like, I'll take my brother as an example. Like he's very linguistically gifted, but he's not a great writer. And so he has gravitated to a few tools that have given him the ability to become a really good writer recently.
Mm-hmm.
And they've broken that barrier down. And now he's able to express himself in writing. I mean, he's always been a very well-spoken person and very good at and very witty, but he's struggled sometimes with written grammar. And he's just found tools that have made all that transparent now.
Interesting.
Don't want to out him here, but yeah.
Yeah, I've had the same thing happen to me with programming. I was kind of a crap programmer. Well, I still am. A nog.
I'm all spaghetti. Yeah.
I'm a nog crap programmer, but I have decent ideas about what I want to program, and I know what I want to program, and I can articulate that well. So guess what? Now I'm a great programmer because I have code here and I have GPT-4 over here, and I can iterate and be like, hey, it just broke in the following way. Like I know Python fairly well. And now I'm standing up web interfaces. I built a mobile app. I wrote all my own APIs. My own web interface calls my own APIs. Like I'm doing like real developer stuff, which I got no business doing.
That's awesome.
Do you say you're a bad programmer as in you just see what really, really, really great programmers that are extraordinary at math and can then translate that into code do? And you just feel like you're not as good as them, but in reality, compared to the average person, you're probably an excellent programmer.
Yeah, great question. So here's how I distinguish. So I am lucky enough to have ideas that most programmers don't have. And I can usually solve something in Bash or Python that didn't exist before. Like I wrote a thing a long time ago that could tell if a web page had changed or not, which was super useful for web application pen testing. And everyone saw it and they're like, oh, that's amazing or whatever. And I get compliments and I feel good or whatever. But then I'm like, hey, can you help me like make this better? And when my developer friends come and look at it, they're like, okay, yeah, well, this is really nice, but can I just rewrite it? Because this is kind of bad.
Yeah.
And they're trying to be nice. And then you rewrite it. As a developer, they're like, here's the proper way to do things. Because like mine was Bash, and it was like super short. And they're like, well, let's lay this out as this is an object, and we're going to call this. And I'm like, oh, that looks hard. Yeah, this is way better. Thank you. And so they just infinitely improve the thing that I had. And now I can do that with GPT-4.
I have this argument with another friend who's like a CTO type. And sometimes we go back and forth of what is the better way to code? Because just because you can lay things out in a structure and a format, sometimes we're actually adding complexity to it for structure's sake that actually doesn't result in better compute.
That is leaky abstraction, by the way, but keep going. Yeah.
So I wonder if, again, you might not be giving yourself as much credit. I don't know. I haven't looked at your code. Maybe it is just total spaghetti, but maybe there's more credit there too.
People have started to debunk Dunning-Kruger, but at least the principle was that when you start to be good at something, you realize just how much you don't know.
So, absolutely.
Yeah. And so my dad is an amazing programmer, good enough to know that I'm just at the beginning of the scale, right? He's truly deep at this stuff. He just took a course in quantum computing at 77 years old. And I'm like, wow. No. And by the way, MITRE has a very cheap $200 course in quantum computing because we don't have enough people that really have the base skills for when the capability really goes up, which is super cool. But yeah, it's an excellent question, by the way, Jacob. That was awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Daniel, what has been the thing that's been like eating at your brain? So we talked about a little bit at the beginning here that if you read something,
if there's one,
if there's one, maybe there's 10, but what's been eating at your brain that hasn't made it out yet into publication, or if you don't want to share it yet because you don't want to put it out to the world before, but what's that current trend that's running through there?
So there's one big idea that's that I keep talking about in different ways. That's honestly, I just think it's about to permeate everything. It's the concept of context. So I'm writing a whole bunch of different software for different purposes. It's like one's a health app, one is like how to manage a security program, but you could actually use it to manage like a county or a planet or a solar system or whatever you want to manage. The idea is you define goals. and you capture context about the entity and the entity's surroundings, and then you plug that all into an all-seeing system like an LLM, and then you have a series of questions that you ask against it. And the series of questions makes up the program, makes up the management of it. Okay?
Right.
And what you could do is you can incorporate different types of wisdom into those questions or into the actions that it recommends. So, for example, if this is a human health app, and I'm doing this for myself, and I've done it for a couple of friends as well, I start by saying, okay, my mission in life is to raise eudaimonia for planet Earth. Okay? That's my mission. Here's my other, sub goals. I've got like 5 goals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2 is infinitely less important than 1. 3 is infinitely less important than 2, etc. Here are my challenges in life. I actually capture like little mini traumas from the past. I capture what I think was trauma in the past or whatever. I capture key events in my life, capture all these different things. Then I capture what I'm trying to achieve in terms of like metrics that actually matter to me, which may or may not be important. And then I tell the system, you are an all-knowing therapist and life coach. And tell me how I'm doing given the following activity. And then I'm scrolling in everything. So this is like, I just had a bite of cheese. And there's a little bit of future stuff because you need to be able to read from Health Kit. And there's a lot of data that we can't yet do. But I'm already feeding it a little bit, snippets of data. So what you could do is just be like, hey, I talked to my friend on the phone the other day. I spent some time with my parents. Or I've been on the couch for 3 weeks watching reruns of whatever. I haven't worked out. I've been eating like garbage. And then I say, why do I feel sad? Why do I feel non-energetic? And what it does is it reaches all the way in your past. It looks at all your current activity. It looks at all your goals. Goal number 3 is spend more time with family and friends. But you've been watching Star Trek The Next Generation for the last 3 weeks. And you haven't done shit. So what it'll respond with is, well, given your goals and what you said you wanted to accomplish, you've actually been working on goal number 13 and goal number 7 for the last 4 months of your life. And by the way, did you know the anniversary of your dog dying was tomorrow? So every year around this time, by the way, just to remind you, you get unhappy like this. The solution is to talk to your friends. So this is the kind of deep, deep guidance that you can have when you have full context about a person. Okay?
Interesting.
This is huge. I mean, in some ways, your subconscious does this, but it doesn't necessarily do it well as a practice.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't do it well.
You're finding like a backup or like a parallel subconscious that says, hey, I'm here to either do a check and balance or to maybe, and it might get into conflict with it, by the way. It might be like, no, I'm telling you to do these things. And your brain is like, no, I want the endorphin right now and screw your policies. But this is super cool.
So check this out. So in my case, my mom wasn't present like early in life. And then I had a stepmom come in and my dad was kind of like an authoritarian and like I missed a lot of socialization early on. Mm-hmm. And what I've been noticing recently is like, wait a minute, I bet you a lot of like my particular types of like weird personality things, some that's weaknesses, some that's tremendous strengths, come from that. So guess what? I'm going to capture it all. And guess what happens if you send that to an LLM? It has access to the entire medical literature of human civilization. So it can basically map, people who have this thing with childhood attachment to mother and, disassociation with adults or whatever, or socialization early on, they tend to have this kind of drama. They tend to have this kind of drama. Oh, you also indicated that you have this kind of drama. That's because click, 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 click. they're seeing all of human psychology at the same time. Whereas when we think about this in our subconscious, we're only seeing the part that is kind of steered towards based on our emotion at that time. It's not a complete picture. And a better way to think about this is watch what happens when I bring it over to business. So Julie's laptop connects at 2:45 a.m. to a file share in the middle of the night, and a tier 1 analyst gets this alert. Is it malicious?
Not enough context.
Not enough context. So what this guy does, he's 19, took a SANS course. This is his first job. He starts pinging around. I don't know. I guess I'll go to Workday. I'll just click. But there's a text box here inside of the IR software. And he starts pasting in notes from random places that his random brain decided to go and pursue. Okay. So he's like, I don't know. And then, okay, it's a file share. Let me click on the file share and see what it has. I don't know. It doesn't look so bad. No, I think this is fine. Action, do not block. Notes, see notes above. That's the state of IR at this point. It's manual. It's like grabbing these straws. So the analog for this, for the human thing that I just talked about, is the LLM knows every box, every host, what data is on it, who connected to it and when. It knows that this is not malicious because Julie is actually in Japan, is where she connected from. She said in Slack yesterday she was going to Japan. The manager said you're approved to go to Japan. The manager said you're approved to work at 2 a.m. And yeah, feel free to log in. Then she said later, hey, I'm logging in, blah, blah, blah. You're going to see me connect or whatever. So it's piecing together every single thing it knows from AWS, from Zoom transcripts, from Slack messages, from every single thing in the business. It's pulling that all together. And this is the most important thing. It holds it all in its mind at the same time. Mm-hmm. So when you ask, is this malicious? It's pulling in terabytes of data and answering just like that. So now most software on the RSA floor, or actually most software period, is a hack and a workaround for the fact that it didn't have the context.
100%.
Which means the LLM is software. It is the replacement for software. With the huge dependency of you have to have the context, which is going to be hard to get. Right? It's hard. It's going to be hard to build multi-terabyte models.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to have. Go ahead.
One of the things for the human example, right? That's a prerequisite for that is ability to have insight and introspection of oneself.
Yes.
Which not every person is good at or wants to be good at, right? So you have to be willing to introspect yourself and then be willing to admit and share.
And to grow. So, I mean, just when you have a relationship with this, call it this LLM-based contextual model, it then is going to interact with you as a personality, probably, unless we find a direct interface. So, which means you're going to interact with it as you would with any other avatar, right? Which means you're going to have to be, what's my relationship with it, and do I trust it personally? Forget the trust model for where the data goes and how it's processed, which is also a thing. Yeah. But you're going to have to then say, so for instance, I have similar to you, Daniel, when I read your article about how much trauma is the right amount of trauma, which we should talk about, especially when you're raising children as I am, which is a fundamental question. But in those cases, you've got to ask yourself, how am I going to accept this feedback? How am I going to process it? And does this become another bad parent? I mean, like my mother was abusive and an alcoholic, for instance, right? And by the way, I sat with a bunch of security folks who I consider really good at their craft and really amazing people. And we all started talking. We realized we all had extremely traumatic childhoods. And like I mentioned on a previous podcast, a friend of mine said, "I'm not surprised you wound up a cyber person." And I was like, that's an interesting thing to say. Yep. And I don't know what it's like in other professions, but when I read your last blog, it hit me enough that I messaged you about it.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, so does that avatar become another bad parent, or do I actually listen to it?
Yeah, interesting. I wonder about that. For the personal side, there are so many uses for this, and the abuse cases, oh my God, are nasty. The abuse, so
The ability to
imagine,
control people with that knowledge, right?
I mean,
To manipulate the way you feel and what gives someone
Big
positive
Brother
versus negative
doesn't even
feedback.
begin to describe it, and
well, so we've all met these people who are like manipulators.
Narcissists in particular, and all
narcissists. Yeah. So you imagine someone like that, but they're powered by an LLM that knows everything about you. So it actually becomes an LLM agent. So rather than a companion, which that'll be the first app, I guess one of the first apps will be, let me talk to myself. But the second app is going to be like, I want to have a best friend who knows everything about me. Right.
It's 90s Neopets just on steroids and actually personalized.
Like I want an actually good dungeon master.
About you.
I'm going to put it out there. I want a good dungeon master, by the way. I'm sick of having to do that for all my friends.
That is a huge one.
That's like a really good one, not the bullshit. Sorry, not the bad one.
No, absolutely. So every single thing they say to you is like hinging on the fact like, you really like magic weapons. You really like, whatever.
Here's more armor. Oh, please. Don't do that. Don't Monty Python.
Right,
don't Monty Hall me, right? Like, yeah.
Exactly. I really worry about the abuse piece. The other thing is, once you dump your soul into this thing, and it's just a text file, you could put I have my entire soul in like a text file, and like
my soul is a bit string. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, if it leaks, like that's eternal urine in the eternal pool. It's not coming back out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then there's I don't know the source on this one. I'll have to find it, but I think I read an article years ago that there's a higher degree of sociopathy and pathology generally among senior executives and CEOs. So do I want my company having access to that, let alone my government? I mean,
definitely not the government, but that's my opinion more than.
Now we're in a seditious podcast, but no. Just joking.
Yeah, I think there's quite a bit of, and here's another angle for this. What if we were so knowledgeable about ourselves that I could put this text file out there and I could know that agents were abusing it and I would be resilient to it because that's how well I knew myself. In other words, the tricks didn't work because I was hardened against them.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal of therapy, where you've learned yourself so well that you can.
I'm going to push back on that one and say, look, everything's got a vulnerability. So I think anything that's sufficiently large, let's assume your soul text file isn't just 128 bits. Let's assume it's pretty large. My suspicion is it's sufficiently complex that you probably can't map it in the foreseeable future, and that somebody who's sufficiently dedicated can exploit it, especially if they can test lots of souls and find the soul penetrating machine.
Yeah, I think it just, for a human, it depends on state and mood. So, for example, I could be in a really powerful mental state, having worked through all my trauma, and then someone comes in, they're like, hey, did you know, blah, 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 compliments, flattery, doing the thing that the documentation says should work. And I'm just like, hey, man, I see you. Nah, don't do that. But I have a bad week, and I'm tired, and I haven't been working out, and I'm like mentally crushed. Well, now all those tactics do work.
Or you could be put into a situation.
Exactly. They can apply pressure that takes you out of your strong situation, and now all the tactics work. Yeah. And how realistic is it to think that everyone's going to be optimizing and they're perfectly strong?
Actually, you probably wouldn't want to. I mean, this is the sometimes the downs are what make the ups worthwhile. I don't want to get too deep into that.
No, it's true. Like ideally, we would be vulnerable with each other and have real conversations, and we would be vulnerable to that sort of manipulation. Like with your friends, for example, you would be. You wouldn't just walk around like rigid and defending all the time. That wouldn't be great.
Well, I think more vulnerability is needed in humankind in general. You see the strongest relationships come out of vulnerability over.
So this is the thing I'm trying with presentations now, by the way. When I'm asked to present, I ask to present about failures instead of successes, because I'm very leery of cults of personality, including my own.
Yep.
That we're going to establish this narrative of look at how freaking awesome I am.
Yep.
So I did a presentation yesterday live, and I started with, here's the worst failure that I know of in my career. I only lasted 8 months. Microsoft asked me to present to product management, and I said, let me present what I think are the 4 biggest mistakes I made when I was a product manager. Because that's actually more interesting. And it says, like, let's not do the heroism thing, right? People want to interact more with human beings than they do with avatars, the other sense of avatar, right? The deity kind.
Well, we started this podcast and I started getting feedback, and I talked to people like, why are you drawn to certain content? What makes you stay for content? Like, what do you actually care about when you're hearing other humans speak? And someone said exactly that. Like, well, there's this one podcast I listen to, and it's with executives, and they interview very specific executives in business, but they go through their resume and they talk about not the times they became the CEO of something, but the time they got fired. They talk about the times they were at their lowest versus the times at the strongest. I really like that podcast. And I think it humanizes it for people. Everyone has failure. And if you hear that other people have failure, especially people you look up to, you're like, that person's more like me than I thought.
Yeah, this is something that's really given me a superpower over the last, I would say, 10 years maybe, is biographies. I've been reading a lot of biographies of really great people.
Interesting.
And really great people judged by their contributions seen decades or hundreds of years later, right? Then you read the biography, and it's like, holy crap. So one I'm thinking of was this philosopher. It might have been Hume. I can't remember if it was Hume or Spinoza. It might have been Spinoza. So whatever. It's like year 7, and he's like in a cabin with a quill. It's like dark. I don't know. Everything's dying around him. I just assume in the year 7. So he's over here writing. He writes hundreds of pages for this massive book that he's writing. It takes him years. He has no friends. Life sucks. He's depressed as hell. He finally works up the money somehow to go all the way to France. He goes in like these salons and everyone's all foo-foo-y and they're like all famous already. And like he plops it down on the table or whatever they do. The whole community looks at it and they're like, well, I just want you to know that you should definitely work on something else because this is absolute and total garbage. And never show your face here again. His life is ruined. He goes back to the cabin, does it again for multiple years, goes back, the same thing happens. Okay? Then he goes back, basically decides to give up, throws another version in the fireplace. A friend rescues it from the fireplace, takes it to a different friend. It blows up. It's one of the biggest philosophical pieces ever. And I'm like, that's what success looks like. Randomness, chance, failure, right? And then I see multiple great people who go through this. It's not like they wake up and they're like, parents are like, hey, did you know you're great? And they're like, yes, I am. And then they produce great things and people say, hey, this is great. No, half of it is like being told you're garbage, actually being garbage, right? Not just being told, but actually producing a whole lot of crap. And then struggling and striving and pushing through that and then getting super lucky on top of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, if you see the world that way, then and you get hit with challenges, it makes you feel like this is not evidence that I'm garbage. This is evidence that I'm just like everyone else and that the solution is pushing through and seeing what happens.
So I had this teacher. So I've done 3 post-secondary areas of study. One was English and philosophy, one was physics and linguistics, and one was counterterrorism. So aside from cyber, those were my 3 study areas. And the first was English and philosophy. And I had this teacher named Bill Coughlin. That's like 30 years ago. And he had 2 messages for us. He was an English teacher. He said, number 1, I don't care what you have to say. I care that you say it clearly. Just get it out there. Get it out there cogently, clearly, tightly, and he separated the rules of grammar, which he said we were all bastardized with. He said he took 2 classes. This isn't a college course, and he said this is how you do it. Don't mess it up. He swore a lot more, right? And he said these are the principles of rhetoric. Use smaller words, shorter sentences, right? And he said, get it across fast, get it hard through. Now the second point is super important. He said, in a democracy, expository writing is critical. Exposition is critical. Not so you can be brilliant, so that you can be attacked and taken down. That's the point. He said, you're going to put it out there. And if you're putting it out there for your ego, go home. Go home. He said, all the interesting things happened in dialogues and papers and committees of correspondence. And I'm actually reading the Sam Adams biography right now. I've just started it.
Oh, nice.
And so we have like the internet and messaging, and believe it or not, committees of correspondence were like that during the Revolutionary War. This was like instant messaging at the time, right? And it was inflammatory. And the Sam Adams was like everywhere, and yet almost nobody knows popularly anything about him except the beer. And he never went by Sam; he went by Samuel. So I should be saying Samuel Adams, right? But he said, all the interesting things like the Federalist Papers and things like that, there were dialogues where people were getting things wrong.
Yeah.
And he said, so like principle 1, get it out there. Principle 2, expect it to be attacked, and it should be. That's the point. If everybody just put stuff out and everybody went, oh, that's great, and started worshiping it, then that's not a good foundation for democracy. It's not a good foundation for a republic.
I like that. It reminds me of make things falsifiable. Right?
It's the same principle with logic as you, because it's a living, breathing thing, a nation.
It's like putting stepstones inside of construction materials so that people can climb.
Exactly. Right. And he used to go purple in the face as he would yell this at us, right? And one of the classes was on young adult lit. He's like, I don't care what your opinion is on young adult lit. He goes like, yeah, you come across and say it, and I can tell you you're wrong and why, and great, you'll get an A if you do that. And he was right.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, one of my most favorite things right now is the winner for Parasite, the Oscar, a few years back. They asked him, like, how did you come up with this creativity thing? And he's like, Scorsese told me that the most personal is the most creative. So basically, if you just articulate the thing that's compelling you and you articulate it well,
it's magnetic. Yeah.
It is magnetic. It doesn't matter if you think it's good or not. What matters is it will be the clearest signal you can imagine. And anyone who hears it, who happens to be vibrating at that same frequency, will instantly resonate.
I love that.
And then if you sort of try to make something that looks like that, it will not vibrate like that. It'll be like empty. And I've had this happen to me like hundreds of times where I have a halfway decent idea, but I over-engineer it. I spend a couple of days writing a post, and I'm just like, this is going to be so amazing. People are going to love this. Crickets, right? But I'm on the toilet with a random idea, and I'm like, hey, isn't it weird that this happens? Boom, resonance. Why? Because it was authentic.
It's really uniquely you, right?
Yeah.
The other thing, Daniel, is that you capture it, which I think you've gotten into the habit of doing, and so much of this is ephemeral. If you didn't capture it over time, that avatar wouldn't be replayable like that. Right? The evolution of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other advantage of having like this sort of avatar is I could use it to train the model. But I could use it to sort of answer questions about myself later. When I say later, I mean like as soon as possible.
Everybody who's listening
in 10 minutes.
Everyone who's listening at some point in the future, we will put links down here, right, Jacob? It's down, right?
What links am I putting down the show notes?
We're gonna put like unsupervised.
Are we all pointing down below?
Yeah, everyone find the show notes.
Yeah,
I think so we're coming towards the end of how long we record for, Daniel. So we usually do about an hour of content. One of the things that Sam had actually pointed out from, I think it was your personal biography or your About Me section, is that you say someday you want to do art and music. So like, this is what you're doing
Painting,
right now.
I think was one of it too. Yeah.
And I on another discussion we were having, I talk about the eclectic nature of my hobbies. And that sometimes I say I collect hobbies more than I necessarily do hobbies, but art is one of them. And I love art. I love painting. I love, just in general interacting with it. And one of the most important lessons I had in my life was by accidentally supporting a friend and taking an art class because they need one more person to get this art class off the ground. So, you have to have a certain class size in college to have a class.
Sure.
And so they needed that one more person. My friend's like, please just take it with me. I want this class.
You were the plus one, literally the plus one.
I was literally the plus one. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's like, I need some credits for that. I need to do this. I took it and I just learned so many lessons about life that I apply both personally and professionally by taking a portraiture class accidentally. And have continued doing some art. I'm not an artist, but I do art, right? It's the same thing I say like about music. I do music. I'm not a musician, but I'd love to hear what draws you to those two things, like art and music. And so many people we talk to when we get down to like what personally drives you outside of your cybersecurity, outside your technology work, they say music. And they talk about their life with their music and how they interact with the world through music. So I'd love to hear a little bit about why you say that.
Music, especially, there's resonance to it inherently. But I'm not going to put words in your mouth. You singled those words out. What is it about those?
For music?
Music and I think you said painting or art. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know where I am with art. I do know I would like to write. I would like to write stories. I would like to paint, but I feel like it's such a distant understanding for me. It's almost like a world I don't get. I would like to push into it at some point, but I know I definitely would like to write fiction.
Me too, by the way. We should do a collaboration at some point.
Yeah. That would be really fun. I'm also
your first pre-order
because it's super scary and hard. For music, I know exactly what I want to do. I want to create certain feelings. That's what I want to do with music, is create certain types of feelings. And I'm super into a particular type of music. I like extreme metal and I like EDM.
That's so funny. I'm an EDM person. My girlfriend is extreme metal. So like I get exposed to both.
You both to get into the other because they're so similar. So you're the EDM person?
I'm the EDM person. Yeah.
Okay. So I've got this concept album that I want to do. It's called the Universal Arc. Actually, I'm going to pull it up real quick.
By the way, while you pull it up, you just made me think. When I was once asked what my superpower would be if I wanted it, I thought of Asimov's Foundation series in The Mule, who had the ability to set emotions in other people.
Really?
And that was the one I wanted, which is what you just said.
I need to read that again.
Yeah. I hope I didn't just ruin it. Like, spoiler alert for people, Asimov. But when you said music, you sort of you didn't say broadcast, but like you could set emotions or cause emotions. I also wonder if that's not partly a remnant of trauma's past. But feel free to bring up whatever it is you're looking up with EDM. It was EDM, I think.
Yeah. So
not exact data match, the music type. Yeah.
Exact data match.
So it's called the Universal Arc. So the album, it's about the life journey of a universe. So the songs are primordial. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you've ever heard of this band called The Ocean.
It doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, I have heard of it. I'm going
to bring it up now.
So you should check out The Ocean. It's incredible. But anyway, the first song is called Primordial. It's ambient.
Nice.
So it's like just kind of, this is like amino acids are combining, right? In like the ocean. Okay. Animal is drum and bass. Dawn of the Intellect, ambient minimal house. Self-destruction, hardcore and hardstyle. Post-human, deep house, minimal, and trance. And then a new home. So like we leave the solar system or we leave the universe or whatever, minimal, ambient. And then entropy escape, which is like the whole new world is like ambient, minimal, and house. So the idea is that we will have like the journey.
This is your idea for how you would structure the album, what types of genres you want to put, and why it's this arc and journey through it. That's really cool. I like that a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, you also just made me think of a book I read. My father gave me over the holidays called Before the Big Bang. By, let's see if I can find who it was by. It was by Laura Mersini Houghton, who is a cosmologist. Very readable, and I highly recommend it for your next food for thought, by the way, Daniel.
So you said metal and electronic. How did you get into the genres? Like, what was drawn to? Would you say I think they both do have high emotional resonance for people that are into those genres. Yeah. And I imagine that's what you mean when you say there's huge crossover, but how'd you get into it?
I got into, so my first music was like dance music, like very early. This is like mid 80s.
Disco then.
That's like breakdancing music. So it's not quite.
It's after disco. Yeah.
Oh, disco.
He said disco. I was like, no, it's a little bit later than that, Jacob, but yeah.
There's disco in the 80s. There's disco now. Always lives on.
Disco forever is what you're saying. All right, I can buy that.
But anyway, I was into that, and that kind of like phased out, and I went right into metal then. So like late 80s.
So right when metal was.
That's when we were all doing it, yeah.
When it was getting big, and I never liked sort of lighter metal, and I still don't. Like, I never liked Warrant or Poison or any of that stuff.
Or hair bands.
I like really heavy stuff. So, Jacob, do you know Abysmal Dawn?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't place a sound in my head.
It's just fantastic. So to answer your question, what I like about metal is I feel positive. I feel optimistic and positive when I listen to metal. Mm-hmm. It's hype music, okay? EDM to me is the same. When I hear EDM, I think there's a world of possibility, and it's helping me better myself. That's the way I think about EDM.
Cool. I could go on and on about the genre, especially how, you said, that conceptual album idea, arcs through the genres. I could go on and on about it. But, maybe for another discussion.
I suspect that the triggers might be different, but that aesthetic resonance is probably the same.
Mm-hmm.
So, the last
and it's something fun when you share it, by the way. But go ahead, Jacob.
I was going to say, the last thing that comes to mind, and maybe we don't have full time for it, Daniel, is what should have we asked you that we didn't ask you?
I don't know. Like you said, there's a million things to talk about. I feel like we could go off into AI stuff, but I don't know of any particular question. I think we covered quite a bit today.
That.
Yeah. I think so too. AI stuff would be interesting. Well, Sam, anything else on your side?
No, I just want to say thank you for coming on. I was super looking forward to it. I love the glimpse into your brain that I get at least once a week, if not more often. And thanks. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.